We are joined today by our two speakers, Michael Marriage, Senior Principal Product Manager, and Terry Mays, Senior Manager of Software Engineering at Progress. Michael will present to you a Pro2 product overview, and Terry will follow that up with a live demo. Also in the studio with us today is Barbara Ware, Senior Product Marketing Manager at Progress, who will be moderating the Q&A. I will now turn it over to Mike so that we can get started. Mike?
Thanks, Michelle, and good day to everyone, and thank you for joining us for this Pro2 webinar. We have several things planned for our presentation today, as Michelle mentioned. I'll first walk you through an overview of Pro2 and what's changed with the release of CDC in OpenEdge 11.7. I'll then turn things over to Terry, who is going to provide a live demonstration of Pro2 and how it works in conjunction with CDC. I'll then wrap up the presentation with a quick recap of Pro2, and we'll take any questions that you might have at the end. So let's get started. For those who are new to Pro2, let's spend a few minutes going over what Pro2 is and the value it brings to an organization. Companies today utilize many different applications to manage the day-to-day operation of the business. These could be ERP or CRM applications, payroll applications, content management systems, etc. But no matter what application a company is using or how many applications there are, one thing is true across all of them. They are creating data. Within each application, this data is of great value to the organization. However, as shown in these two independent quotes, the full value of this data is lost as long as it remains trapped within these applications and is used only for operational purposes. Unlocking this data and consolidating it across all of the applications within the organization will provide a complete view of the business. This is where the value increases exponentially. One or more of the applications you utilize is running on an OpenEdge database. And just like all of the other applications that your organization may use, the data stored within this OpenEdge database must be consolidated and made available for reporting and analysis. Enter Pro2. Pro2 is a product developed by Progress that allows an organization to replicate data from an OpenEdge database into a target database. This is done in a secure and reliable fashion with no negative impact on the operational system. It is important to note that unlike other OpenEdge replication products we offer, which is used for disaster recovery, Pro2 can replicate a subset of tables and fields to the target database. Also, the structure of the target database does not need to match the structure of the source database. In fact, most customers that use Pro2 for reporting purposes have additional tables, fields, and indexes in the target database to better support their business intelligence product. So you may be asking yourself, what is the challenge in creating a replication solution? Why couldn't we just write something ourselves? Well, as the volume and velocity of data increases, technology improves, waiting to see data that is 24 hours old is no longer acceptable. The fast-paced businesses of today demand that data be available as quickly as possible. Usually this is done in real time or near real time, so that decisions can be made immediately and a competitive advantage gained. Looking at old data can cause an organization to make a bad decision that will adversely affect the company. But the real difficulty in creating your own replication solution is the complexity in managing the differences in database structures, which constantly evolve, as we all know, while, and this is the important part, not having a negative impact on database performance. So how do you handle the different data types between an OpenEdge database and, let's say, a SQL Server database? Or what if the target Oracle database resides on another server in the data center or is even located halfway around the world? How do you recover from the target database dropping during the transmission of data? Or how do you design a solution that ensures all of this is done securely, reliably, and in real time? As you can see, there really are a lot of things to consider, and attempting to do this on your own is no small undertaking. One other thing to consider is compliance rules. Almost every region has one or many rules that govern how data must be managed and secured. Simply exporting an ASCII file and importing it into your target database may cause you to be in violation of a compliance rule and subject to a hefty penalty. The solution to this challenge is Pro2. Pro2 provides real-time data replication from your OpenEdge database to a target database. As data changes in your operational database, it will be replicated over to the target so that reporting and analysis is always being performed against the most current version of data. With Pro2, you can connect to any number of OpenEdge operational data sources and replicate that information to multiple targets. And a very important point, all this is done with no disruption to or adverse effect on your operational systems. Everything works as normal. Pro2 allows you to create an easy, automated process to continually move data from your OpenEdge database into a target database, which provides the ability to use other third-party reporting solutions against the replicated data without degrading the performance of your operational database. You can even optimize the structure of the target database to better support your reporting system. Remember, the target structure does not need to match the structure of the source database. And because the data is always up to date, the information provided in your reporting solution will be timely and relevant, allowing your business to make better business decisions. As this infographic recaps, Pro2 provides a real-time replication service from an OpenEdge database to a Microsoft SQL Server, Oracle, or even another OpenEdge database target. And all of this is done without risk or negative effect on your source systems. Pro2 was developed by Progress specifically for OpenEdge and supports all OpenEdge source database versions from 8.3 all the way through to the most recent version, 11.7. And Pro2 is a mature product that is continually being enhanced. In fact, Terry will be demonstrating some functionality today that was made available in OpenEdge 11.7 and Pro2 version 5.0. That is, leveraging CDC to drive data replication. And there are over 200 customers worldwide that have already implemented Pro2, and we have well over 600 implementations within our customer base. Some of our partners have also created a new revenue stream by embedding Pro2 into their application and providing data replication capabilities to their end customers for a fee. There's a great opportunity here, and if your company is interested in doing the same, please reach out to your Progress account manager to start a dialogue. So before I turn things over to Terry, who will provide a demonstration of Pro2, I felt it important that I step you through what's going on within Pro2. Users will make changes to the database through the application interface. These are create, update, and delete operations. As these records hit the database, a replication trigger fires that inserts a record into the replication queue. A service running on the server constantly monitors this replication queue, and when a record that requires replication is present, the required action, be it create, update, or delete, is performed in the target database. The service receives a response from the target database on the success or failure of the operation, and this, if successful, will flag the record as replicated or delete it from the queue based on how you configure Pro2. If the replication process failed, Pro2 will provide logging and notification and will continue to attempt replicating that record. CDC will work very much in the same way. However, instead of using replication triggers, Pro2 will utilize the database-managed CDC table. In this case, a service monitors the CDC table, and when a new CDC record is present, the process will insert a record into the replication queue. Everything from this point forward remains as I previously described, except that the CDC record is also removed or flagged once successfully replicated. Again, how this works is customizable by you, as are most things within Pro2. So I've talked enough, and let's move along to the exciting part, where I'm going to turn things over to Terry, who is now going to show us Pro2 in action. Terry?
Thanks, Mike. And and welcome, guys, to our Pro2 V5 demonstration, especially in regards to OpenEdge 11.7 CDC. I'm going to recap Mike's last slide there for just a minute so that we completely understand what the differences are in non-CDC Pro2 and CDC-based Pro2. So my first slide here is just a very quick network representation of land-based replication using Pro2 and replication triggers. In a lot of cases, there is an external REPL database that houses the queue that Mike mentioned in his slides, and these tables associated with the REPL database most certainly can be embedded into the OpenEdge database so that there is a single database housing all of the, not only your normal database CDC, or I'm sorry, CRUD activity, but also CDC as related to Pro2. So in this particular environment, if a customer were to change a record, a trigger does fire and it will write a replication queue entry into the REPL database or the REPL queue table, whether it's embedded internally into your source database or in this diagram, it shows externally in a REPL database. Once a queue record is applied, we have a replication process service that is running and is constantly monitoring for events that show up in queue. That process is tied potentially back to the source database as well, and also to the target database. And as Mike's slide described, upon successful replication, then queue entries are normally deleted or marked as applied based on configuration rules. So in a CDC environment, this process is slightly different in that the user community for the application is no longer tied to an external REPL database in the case that these are actually external. So from an application perspective, if this is a CDC-enabled 11.7 database, the user community is connected to the source databases exactly as they are today without change. And the process is that we simply CDC enable this database. So from an application footprint, there are no modifications to that footprint. So in this particular scenario, if a customer were to make a change, a user would make a change into the OpenEdge database, a CDC policy is fired and change data capture records that event within the OpenEdge database. And I'll show you those pieces here in just a minute. Now the new CDC add-on for Pro2 is there is a new service process that we're calling CDC admin that you can start, and this process will run in a variety of modes. It can run client server, it can run via app server connections, lots of configuration options for that. But basically in a nutshell, what happens is the CDC admin process will read the new CDC change tracking events recorded by 11.7 CDC. And as Mike pointed out, it will create REPL queue records in the REPL database. But again, the users from a community perspective or an application perspective no longer have to be tied to this external REPL database. The fact that we're doing copies here, there's again several options associated with how this process runs. We can do queue compression on the fly with CDC admin process. So we can suppress multiple entries associated with a row ID. We can apply threading options as we copy data off to the REPL queue table. So again, many new features about the way this particular process can be configured. But the nice thing here is this is a standalone event that now copies CDC into the REPL database, which then means that the replication process itself can stay exactly the same as it was. So if you are a pre-Pro2 V5 customer and you have some custom implementation of how the replication process works. Maybe you are consuming business objects as a part of replication. Maybe you're doing some fairly sophisticated ETL as a part of replication. The good news is that none of that process will change in any way, shape, or form. You will be able to run that exactly as you do today. One other little enhancement to the process here is you will notice that I've dotted the line of replication connecting back to the source database. So optionally, as Pro2 CDC admin copies CDC to RepelQ, we can ask this process to bring a copy of source with it, which will basically eliminate a whole connection of replication to the source database. So again, hopefully the idea here is that there are many, many configuration options for the way this new process works. Pro2 will consume standard CDC, and then based on how you want this process or how you configure this process, then we can either eliminate connections or really just consume replication as you have it configured today if you happen to be a pre-V5 customer. Okay, so let's see all of this in action, and we'll bring up a VM here that happens to have Pro2 version 5 already running. And I'll step through some pieces of this, and I have various queries already enabled here so that we can bounce through detection of replication and things quite quickly. But the first couple of things to notice right off the bat. First, this is the Pro2 admin console as you've seen before. A couple of changes here on the main screen, and mostly associated with how threads are viewed and controlled. Pro2 pre-version 5 supported threading for more than 5 threads. We called those extended threads, if you see that in the documentation. And the problem with previous extended threading was if you ran threads 6 through 10, let's say, you had no visual control or logging level control individually over extended threading. All of extended threading controls came off the setup of thread number 5. Now all threads can be controlled individually. So if I happen to be running extended threads here, I certainly can run a thread number 6 pending my license, that I have the appropriate licensing for extended threads. But the idea is for thread 6, I can run logging levels different than any other threads set up in the process. Also, you'll notice that I'm running a difference in configuration across threads in how Pro2 deals with RepelQ records upon successful replication. I have a few threads where I'm marking those as applied, a few threads where I'm that I'm deleting records on the fly, and then you can see where obviously I am doing different logging levels across those threads. So now all of these same rules and visuals apply to anything that is considered extended threads, 6 and above. So hopefully this allows you to, if you happen to be running extended threads, control those in a little more organized fashion. Now the second thing here, I'm going to flip over to my DB tab. And the first thing that we notice is that Pro2, we have enabled Pro2 for CDC. Our second indicator here shows that the source database that I am replicating is also CDC enabled. So I certainly could have a situation where I have told Pro2 that I want CDC enabled, but the source database may not be CDC enabled. So this is runtime detection that tells us we can deal with policy information with CDC. Now, I'm not going to dive too deep into actual CDC. I do have OpenEdge management running, so we can see CDC at that level, but I'm not going to get specifically in all of the details about 11.7 CDC. We're going to keep this demo associated with how Pro2 interacts with a CDC-enabled database. But keep in mind, I can tell Pro2 that I expect CDC, which is this flag here. And then the second check is that the database that I am connected, databases I should say, are in fact CDC enabled. And if both of these flags are true, then certain things happen on the mapping tab associated with not generating triggers, but generating CDC policies. So let's dive into that so we can see that a bit. Okay, so this is the new mapping tab, and it is color-coded so that we can get some pretty quick visuals about what's going on at the CDC level. First, there is a legend here that describes what this color coding means, and I'm going to show you this in OEM just a minute so you can see a correlation of how this process works. But the high-level view of CDC is to enable, first you enable CDC on the database itself through Pro2 or through OpenEdge Management online. And then the idea is you add CDC policy information to the database that tells the CDC process which tables you wish to track change data capture. In this particular case, you will notice that I have mapped tables. And this visual is very similar to previous Pro2 versions. We have a couple of unmapped tables that we could apply replication to. We have a series of map tables. As I click through these, fields of tables show up at the bottom. So this is very similar to before. But there's one distinct difference in color coding here. And what this means is that anything in green means that has, not only is there a CDC policy in play, but it is an active CDC policy, which means change data capture for that table is actively being tracked. The fact that these are yellow means there is a policy in play for this, but the policy is inactive, which means change data capture process, normal 11.7 CDC, is not actively tracking changes to this table. So if I were to go in my application, change benefits, you would not see Q records show up based on this because the policy is inactive. We're simply not tracking changes. And we'll flip some of this here in just a minute so that you can see this process. So, so the idea, you map tables, you'll apply policies to those tables, which will in effect begin to turn on the CDC process, and then you activate those policies, which is basically turning the trigger on in old pre-V5 world, basically in setting the Gen Q rec flag, if you want to talk in old terminology. And then we would begin to see CDC activity captured for any customer changes. And then remember, we start a new CDC admin process, which would then take those CDC changes and apply them to RepelQ with all the threading information associated with it. Okay, just so as a part of backup here, I have OpenEdge Management running. And let me start at top level for this database. So I have a Sports 2000 database. The thing that we notice here in OEM is absolutely that change data capture is enabled for this particular database, which mimics exactly what Pro2 was telling me here. The second thing is I can now view policies associated with change data capture. Now, all of these policies were created right from the Pro2 application. I'm just simply using OEM as a method to shadow what's going on under the covers and behind the scenes associated with CDC. So as we saw before, I have 3 tables with inactive policies, and we absolutely see that at the CDC level. And then I have many tables associated with active policies, which means that change data capture is actively tracking changes associated with that table. The last thing of significance here is for customers who aren't using necessarily Pro2 CDC licenses, but maybe a normal CDC license. This policy name indicates that the policy was generated via Pro2, and there's some significance of that we'll talk about later. Okay, let's see all of this work. All right, I have an application here. that's tied to my source database. And I have some pre-selected queries here. We're just going to run customer selects, and I'm going to be modifying customer 1. And we'll notice that the current value for city is Burlington. We're going to be changing some of that, so we'll see it change here in a minute. And we'll notice that replication is not yet running. So if I were to now change city in my application, a couple of things. First, we'll notice that I have not yet received a RepLQ record for that. But CDC is active. And if you remember back to the previous slide, there is a new process called CDC admin. Let's peek under the covers here for just a second. I'm going to actually query the CDC change tracking table so that you can see events are actually firing within the application. So I'm reading CDC change tracking. We did get an event based on my application, but we're not yet running the CDC admin process, so none of this change data capture information has yet to be consumed. So let's do that. Now, normally we start things through scheduled task, and we certainly will do that towards the end of this, but I'm going to run these a little more interactively just so we can see startup and shutdown processes of these. So first, I'm just going to simply start CDC admin. And remember, this process is simply reading change data, CDC change tracking information, and creating RepLQ with all of threading information or any other things associated with mapping itself. So notice, now that CDC admin is running, I do have RepLQ information showing up with all of the right things, what thread number it's supposed to be running on, things of that nature. And if we now read our CDC info, you will notice that my configuration is set up to leave change data capture records intact and simply mark those as applied so that Pro2 knows it has processed this change data capture record. So if you are pre-V5 Pro2 customers, you will notice this looks very, very familiar to the way replication works, specifically if you do a disposition of mark as applied, which means we're going to leave Q records around as well for reporting purposes. There are lots of reasons to leave these things around. But so all the same processes apply to how change data capture is consumed as well. So now, if I were to start replication, and again, I'm just going to simply do interactive on this for now. We've started replication. Replication saw that a RepLQ was in play, and it replicated that data. And so now if I refresh my query here, you notice it did in fact change. Now, we stumbled through a lot of that, so let's do it one more time, just a little smoother here. So we will change this to something else. I will put that away. Notice that CDC admin had already captured that record. It's now in queue. Replication will see that. And if we query, you'll notice that it does in fact change. So pretty cool. And again, this process is uber configurable. So you can see some options that I'm passing here, the database, some thread information, whether or not the process should remove CDC records on the fly, and then some WAM-based arguments as well. So kind of in recap here, I'm going to shut replication down again. And a couple more points here about CDC information. CDC is very similar in nature to auditing, where OpenEdge audit, I can't actually manipulate these records, right? They're put in play for you to do some sort of audit-based queries on that. So I can purge audit information, and I can actually download it and get it into another database for reporting purposes. But this ability for me to mark rows on the actual CDC record is where CDC and auditing begin to differ in their functionality. And also notice, since I am marking these as applied, there are CDC processes for purging that information. You can schedule purge jobs. So if you're leaving applied around for some reason, maybe you're doing validation on replication, and for a few days you want to run mark as applied versus delete, then you would probably want to schedule purge to get rid of those. And there is retention days associated with this. Let's see. You can determine what database we're coming from, how many we're going to process in when mode sort of idea. And there's also counters associated with this. So if you're curious about, let's do applied actually, you can see at any time how much is actually queued up, applied or not, over on the CDC side. So a lot of tools associated with all of this. But again, the thing I wanted to show you here, where we begin to differ, CDC begins to differ from actual OE auditing, is I'm just going to do a purge by hand here. So I'm just reading the CDC change tracking. I'm going to do a delete on that, right? Which you would never be able to do with auditing. So if I were to rerun this query, you notice all that data is gone. So, all right. So now let's play with this a little bit. So now we, before we had inactive policies. And really, let's play with customer a bit. We know customer was working. We saw it replicate, right? So I am just right on the fly here. I am going to inactivate this policy. So my visual indicator certainly shows that this customer table no longer has active policy. If we just revalidate that in OpenEdge management, we will see that the policy is marked as inactive on this particular table. But here's the thing to notice now. So I'm going to make a change to this again, and I'm going to commit that change. And so if I reread CDC, you will notice no change tracking is being accomplished for that particular table. So if you need to suppress tables on the fly, you absolutely can do this. This is very similar to pre-version 5, where the Gen QREC flag. And you will notice, even though we are in CDC mode, the Gen QREC indicator is mimicking the fact that change data capture is not being tracked for this particular table. Now, obviously, if I were to inactivate a table, I would need to resynchronize that table because potentially I'm losing transaction activity for that. But you certainly could do that. And we can absolutely reactivate this right on the fly. So if I then make another change, we would see that change. And my CDC process is running. So we should see that get applied. Now we're here, which means replication can oops, I'm sorry, I turned that off earlier. We can restart replication. And we now see the data completely flow all the way to the target side database. Now in this particular case, I inactivated that policy, which means I potentially lost transaction data here. So just like in any previous versions of Pro2, right, I absolutely can truncate this table, and I can rerun bulk loads for this table, right? And I could do it all, but let's just do customer. You'll notice in the new versions, starting with version 5 bulk loads, now have the option to selectively copy by source database. It's new in the event that you're running multiple sources. So if we run that now, data is being pushed, and if we were to re-look at this data, you'll notice it all came over. Our funky use of city here. And now that everything is just naturally running, CDC admin is running, replication is running. Again, if we just try to be, we'll make one more change here just to show that the process flows smoothly. Have a couple of records here. It's already been applied. Shows up in queue. Normal replication plus whatever transformations we had previously described in pre-version 5 replication scenarios are all in play. And again, if I reselect, you will notice that replication worked exactly like it should. So that's it in a nutshell, guys. I mean, you can see Pro2 is dealing with CDC. You do not have to break out into OpenEdge management to manage CDC. It all can be managed right from within the tool. I absolutely can turn these policies. Let's actually go through one other new interface change here. So I have three tables here within active policies. So one last point. So you'll notice that we've changed a lot. This used to be very similar to the way DB Select worked in multiple source database replication environments. And so we took that concept to many things associated with mapping now. So this is a common interface. If I were going to map tables, same thing. I can add these new tables to replication. Okay, so now those are mapped. So instead of doing it all through these browsers, it's all now through just regular pop-up menus. So now let me show you these two tables, by the way. So I added 2 new tables, and notice they came over without a policy at all. So I can actually, either through a right-click pop-up, or I can use the global interface associated with that. I can say add policies here. Okay, and if I add those and say okay, you will notice that we created inactive policies. Pro2 does on policy creation, by default, it will create inactive policies so that whenever you, and that really is to take load off of source, right? If you were to add a bunch of tables to mapping and create the policies, and again, if we shadow this over on this side, you will notice now that if I can get to the bottom of this, you will see vacation and warehouse are in play, right? And so then I can then selectively activate those policies, okay? But this will allow you to get everything set up, and then you can begin to slide in active policies as you see fit. So maybe if you're a brand new customer to Pro2, instead of an existing guy, maybe you wish to start putting some tables in place slowly, testing replication, make sure the process works. So that's a nice way to, you could come over and say, I really only want to begin replication with customer, right? But we've tested all of that. We can say all go. And now all of our policies are active. So no matter the table, any table that I do replication on within my application, all of those changes are now being tracked. The fact that CDC admin process is working means that we are actively getting REPL queue. And the fact that replication is running means that the target database, regardless of type, SQL Server, Oracle, even OpenEdge, is also actively being updated as well. And then just one very last point here. As far as the CDC admin processes are concerned, we have given the ability to thread this process just like replication can be threaded. So you can see we've tried to take all the same themes associated with how Pro2 worked, how it was configurable, how you could thread it and spread load. We took all of those ideas and applied it to the CDC admin process. There is a special configuration for this. I can start a process called thread 0, which is exactly what I have done here. Even though my title is wrong, and for this demo, you will notice that I passed in thread 0 here. And what that means, what thread 0 tells the CDC admin process to do is, regardless of which table this thread is mapped, create RepelQ records on the fly. So in smaller transacted databases, you can get away with running a single CDC admin process to broker all the traffic associated with CDC into admin. So regardless of whether you're running multiple threads for actual replication, again, in low volume environments, you can get away with running a single CDC admin process. On the other hand, if you want to multi-thread this, then you can simply just start these up as thread 1, 2, 3, and 4. And if I were to start CDC thread 1, it would only deal with change data capture records associated with tables mapped to thread 1. Okay, so again, the idea here is to give you configuration options to be able to handle volume in different ways, and really just to continue the theme associated with Pro2 in that will allow you to set configurations that best meet the needs of how you are doing replication and maybe potentially the volume associated with your replication. Okay, guys. Well, thank you for attending today. That's a wrap up on Pro2 V5 as a demo, and I'm going to toss it back to Mike.
Great. Thanks, Terry. I'm sure that everyone can clearly see the benefit of Pro2 and how it overcomes the challenges in implementing a data replication solution. Let's just recap some of the benefits of Pro2. Pro2 has a small footprint and will not adversely impact your operational system. Data changes are captured regardless of where they came from. Both ABL and SQL operations are supported and managed by Pro2. Pro2 includes an administrative interface that allows you to easily customize the data that Pro2 will replicate and notify you when things don't go as expected. Terry demonstrated a lot of that functionality for us today. For those that need an extra degree of customization, much of the product can be modified through the use of parameters, templates, or even changing the ABL code directly if that's what you need to do. And all of the subtle and sometimes not so subtle differences between database types is handled for you automatically, and data is constantly updated to the target. So as far as next steps go, feel free to contact your Progress Account Manager to set up a personalized demonstration for you around Pro2. And after that demonstration, we typically hold a technical review to understand your overall infrastructure or topology within the organization, the number of databases you have, etc., so that we can ensure that Pro2 will meet your needs and come up with a plan to make sure that it works as efficiently as possible. After that, we'll implement Pro2, and you'll begin to make timely and informed business decisions against that real-time replicated data. So I believe we have a little bit of time left for questions, so I'm going to turn things over to Barbara now. Barbara?
Thanks, Mike, and thanks everybody for joining us on today's webinar. We have several questions coming in actually, and a lot of them are around the change data capture. CDC is change data capture, a feature available in 11.7. Pro2 5.0 takes advantage of change data capture. But because we've got so many questions about change data capture, Mike, can you take just a minute and explain what change data capture is with respect to 11.7 and the difference between that and what we use Pro2 for?
Yeah, absolutely, Barbara. So with change data capture, you're allowing the database itself to monitor those create, update, delete type of events as they come into the database And when those events occur, it's going to be stored within an internal table in the progress database. It's going to be used to track those changes. And then Pro2 is going to, as Terry had demonstrated, monitor that table and extract the data and pull it into Pro2 into the REPL queue and then continue the process on from there, as opposed to the previous methodology, of creating replication triggers that were going to monitor those events. So with CDC, we no longer are tying the customer's application to the replication database, so there's not a requirement there that everything be live and up and running, because if the database is down, the trigger fires and it can't write, it's going to back out a transaction. We've disconnected that requirement now, so that if for some reason that replication database is down, the CDC records will continue to accumulate, and then once replication comes back up, then it's going to automatically just catch up and pull that information. So it's a process that's being handled at the database level now. It doesn't require us to install any replication triggers or do anything special to get that working, other than, creating those policies on the database. Hopefully that answered the question.
And there is no need for an additional CDC license, right, Mike? It's included in the Pro2 upgrade.
Correct. So when you purchase Pro2 version 5.0, we do include a CDC license with that, so that if you want to utilize CDC, so your operational source is an 11.7 database, you do not have to go out and obtain a separate CDC license for that. Now, do keep in mind that the CDC license we include with Pro2 is for Pro2 use only, but there is no additional charge for the CDC license. And the other good news here is that we have not increased the price of Pro2 either to accommodate that included license. So everything remains the same pricing-wise, and you do receive a CDC license for your 11.7 operational database.
Thanks. So this one I think is for Terry. What's the benefit of Pro2 over ODBC for third-party reporting?
There's a couple of ways to answer that, I think. If you were doing ODBC back into your OpenEdge database for reporting purposes, you would be bound by the schema structure associated with that database. And so, for example, maybe you're running some ODBC reporting that, is running slow. You need to add an index to that. Well, if you purchased that application that the OpenEdge database is tied to, sometimes people are reluctant to make schema changes necessary on the OpenEdge side to support, ODBC queries being fast. The nice thing about Pro2, even if you were doing it to, pro to pro and going back even to an OpenEdge database, is really, the concept is you would point all your ODBC DSNs to the target database, regardless of type, right? Even if it was pro to pro. But the nice thing is you can begin to change the schema structure on the on the Pro2 replicated target. And if you see things like you need an index to make an ODBC report run fast, then simply add that index to the target. You don't affect the source database in any way, shape, or form. Replication still just works. And now you can begin to tune the target database for the needs of the reporting users, and the source database can be tuned for the needs of the application users, and those things no longer have to be the same. Hopefully that answers that.
Okay. Here's another one. It appears that tables are manually mapped to threads in Pro2. Is there a way to have Pro2 automatically multi-thread without having to predict the relative volumes of changes on the different tables?
That is a very good question. Currently, Pro2 does not automatically predict threading. We have experimented with reading VSTs and trying to glean that information. And if you think that is an important feature, I would suggest you go to the Pro2 community and add that. because we're constantly reading that for roadmap items. I can tell you that we've already started playing with that a bit, but at present 5.0 does not automatically map based on predicted volumes. Very good question, though.
So there's a few questions coming in about using Pro2 for disaster recovery. Mike, I'd like you to talk a little bit about that. We don't recommend that, but the questions are, if you're using it for DR, is the replicated database view only, and how does implementing Pro2 work with normal replication plus for DR purposes? If you want to replicate the database to the cloud for DR, does licensing cover? You want to talk a little bit about that, Mike?
Sure, and really I could sum it up by saying that Pro2 is not for disaster recovery. Reason being, if you are trying to recover from some sort of failure, because the structure of the target database is not going to match the structure of the operational database, because Pro2 does include a few additional fields, such as last time updated, things of that nature, in the replicated tables for auditing purposes. The application that you're using it for, or doing DR against, is not going to run against that replicated database. So there's some things that you would have to do in order to get those CRC checks back in line, so that your R code and the like will run against it. So it's definitely not a DR product. We don't position it as such. We do have OpenEdge replication, which would be used for disaster recovery. So they are two separate and distinct products. And I don't know, Terry, if you wanted to expand on that from the underlying technology point of view or not, but it definitely is not a DR product.
And that's correct. If a customer is looking for DR, OpenEdge replication and AI is the way to go for DR. OpenEdge replication requires that the databases source and target be the same so that you can flip over at any point. Mike's right. Even if you were using Pro2Pro, the CRC on the tables is different. So it would take some manipulation to get the CRCs back in sync for you to run off of that database. So really, Pro2 is typically positioned for replicating data out of OpenEdge into some target that you're using for for purposes other than DR. We do have a question, a follow-up with that. Will Pro2 work in conjunction, I guess I should say, with OE replication or OE replication plus? And the answer to that is yes, actually. And that would work in CDC or even the old trigger mode. Those things are completely independent from one another, so they can work in conjunction, no sweat. There was another question.
What if the OE replication is already present? How will implementing Pro2 impact performance?
Well, if you already have OER in place, and you were, if you were doing CDC, really what would be impacted is just straight. It's almost like you would be doing a schema change to the OpenEdge database, so they get handled exactly the same way. When you implement CDC or when you enable CDC on a database, you have to tell the CDC process what is my data area structure and what is my index area structure. And so if you were writing those into new areas, you would have to create the areas on the OER target, and then everything would start working. If you're doing trigger-based replication or trigger-based CDC, I guess is what I should say. So this would be pre-11.7, pre-V5, and you use replication triggers for tracking CDC. All the same rules apply. You would need, as soon as those schema definitions went in, that would automatically get replicated via OER, and it would just work, actually, pending you weren't writing to new structures that needed to be created on the target side database.
So back to upgrading to Pro2 5.0, can you upgrade Pro2 5.0 against an 11.3 OpenEdge database?
Yeah, absolutely can, and I would encourage customers to do so. lot of enhancements in 5.0, lots and lots, and many of those were not all CDC. So we've made several improvements. By far, probably the most stable replication product that we've done so far. And so I would encourage all of you to go to 5.0. And then if you, at some point in time, if you upgrade to 11.7 on the source, then you could begin to also take advantage of CDC licensing.
Right, and along the lines with that, does this mean that Pro2 will no longer work with replication triggers? And of course, it doesn't mean that. That's
right. You have an option at Pro2, and even if you had a CDC license, maybe a customer purchased their own CDC license, you don't have to, Pro2 does not have to work in CDC mode. So if you were doing your own thing at the CDC level, you could tell Pro2 to continue to use trigger-based change data capture events, and all of that just works.
What about if the source database is on OE10.2b or OE10b?
Yeah, so all the new CDC stuff, the actual database enablement of change data capture is an 11.7 and above feature. So you wouldn't be able to do real CDC, but so you would still be basically using replication triggers. And just so everybody's clear about what all that is, right? I mean, what built-in 11.7 CDC gave us was the ability to track internal database changes without the need for triggers. And we've probably gotten a question or two, does that replace Pro2? Well, no, it doesn't, because really Pro2, the guts of Pro2, or the heart of it, I guess I should say, is really all of the copying of data based on mapping, transaction detection, ETL process. All of that is really Pro2. We had invented our own CDC mechanism using replication triggers back in the old days. So CDC would actually just replace the trigger portion of Pro2, not the actual replication portion of Pro2. So if you're trying to invent your own thing, CDC would give you the change data capture mechanism, but then you would still have to write all of the replication piece itself. Anything else you got there, Barb?
Let's see. I think the rest of the questions kind of are around CDC. So what I thought I would do is just let you go for now, and we'll get back to you. Any questions on CDC, you can reach out to Mike, Terry, or me, and we'll try to do something for you to explain that a little better, maybe another webinar in the future, so stay tuned. I think I've gotten all the questions about the different versions. Just a couple more about Pro2. The source and target database, do they need to be on the same server?
Absolutely not. And as a matter of fact, the source, we support even WAN-based replication. So the source database can even be in the cloud, with target databases being on premise, or lots of scenarios for that.
Are there any features available other than CDC utilization from Pro2 version 4.6 to Pro2 version 5? That's a good question.
Yeah, and I wish I had my notes in front of me for that. There are many, actually, and I don't know if it's published up on the community forum. If not, I will get it up there for you. But yes, there are many, many new features available in 5.0 that are not specifically related to CDC.
I'll send you a link that you can go to on our website to see some of those. And that's all the time we have today. Thanks everybody for coming and for learning about Pro2. Thanks Terry, and thanks Mike.